the invite. My name is Chris Body. I'm an inspector with the Toronto Police Service. I've carried the mental health portfolio for close to 10 years now, along with my partner, Deputy Chief Mike Federico, which some of you may know. Sadly for me, my partner is going to be retiring in September, so this is going to be my baby to carry for probably the rest of my career. So one of the things I did most recently, which you may find of interest, you may recall a couple of years ago, then Chief Blair had a review of our the way that the Toronto Police Service interacts with people with mental illness and our own personal wellness. So we hired retired Justice Frank Iacobucci to do a review of our work, and he came back to us with 84 recommendations. I'll take you through all 84 recommendations. No, I'm just kidding. But a number of those recommendations dealt with our members' wellness and the importance of having a healthy employee, which would make for a healthy and professional public servant. So I would invite you to go on our website and you can see all 84 recommendations for yourself. And I think you might find it very interesting, and we're updating them as it goes. So it's going to be a living document, probably forever. So that's me. I'll pass it over to Kevin.
I'm Kevin Doherty. I'm with Toronto Fire Services. I've been there for 29 years. I've enjoyed my time there. I'm actually, I suffer from PTSD. I really didn't know what it was when I was dealing with my issues, but eventually I was able to, I was off work for over 3 years, and I was able to get to the point where I was able to return back to work. I've been back for about 2 years right now, so I'm just going to share after a little bit of my experience with PTSD, some of the things I had to do for myself, and some of the things I need to really do today. I'll share that after. Thank you.
Kathy, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kathy Adatui. I'm a social worker employed at Bellwood Health Services. I currently work in the addiction as well as the PTSD and OSI program. We run a program that is concurrent for addiction and PTSD, and we're on the cusp of launching a PTSD standalone program as well, so I'll be working in both programs. And I come to you today willing to answer questions about symptomology and looking at hopefully quality of life, and also the need for residential treatment if somebody's symptoms become so acute that that's what they require.
Okay, maybe we'll go over to Bill.
My name's Bill Rusk. I'm just recently retired after 30 plus years of policing between two organizations. I'm a lived experienced person with OSI and PTSD as an individual and as a spouse. I was shot in the line of duty in the face, neck, shoulder, back, and right hand. And my wife has been involved in a serious shooting of her own. She's subsequently retired on through the WSIB system, and I have been through the system several times in terms of with operational stress injuries and WSIB. As we're both directors with Badge of Life Canada. Badge of Life Canada is a peer-led nonprofit national organization with regards to police personnel and correctional personnel across Canada for active and retired and civilian and sworn members. We've been, in the last 10 months, we've been all across from the East Coast with Memorial University in Newfoundland out to Surrey, BC in regards to delivering conferences and education. We have a website, a hub of resources on our website that is available to first responders in terms of crisis resource links and therapists that are listed on there that specifically treat operational stress injuries. And our goal is to basically try and eliminate the stigma and give the resources that are out there and network and collaborate with organizations that want to network and collaborate with us.
Thanks, Bill. Katya.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Kathy Kamkar. I'm a clinical psychologist at the Work, Stress and Health program at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I'm also an assistant professor within the Department of Psychiatry at University of Toronto, and I'm also a medical advisor to the Board of Directors at Badge of Life Canada. So within the Work, Stress and Health program, we deal primarily with occupational trauma, occupational injuries. We provide evidence-based assessment and treatment for anxiety, for depression, and again, primarily for operational stress stress injuries, and a great deal of work and with our first responders, and it's definitely our passion. So I'm obviously very much delighted to be here today as as Chris very much mentioned, very much the importance of us normalizing the talk around mental health and mental illness. And the more we are able to talk about, it, then we are able to further reduce the stigma attached to mental health and mental illness, which, by the way, we have noted a significant improvement in the past 5 to 10 years, especially in the past 5 years or so. And of course, we are able to encourage early help seeking. So of course I can go on and on, but I know if I go on and on, Inspector Bodie is going to stop me right away.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Kathy. And Vince, I imagine you were experiencing Toronto traffic, were you?
Oh, of course.
Who looks after traffic in this town?
Talking about a trigger.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vince Savoya, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Tema Contra Memorial Trust. Tema Contra was a young, vibrant Torontonian, or Haligonian, actually. She was from Halifax. Back in, when was it now? 88. Working as a paramedic here in Toronto, I had the unfortunate opportunity of attending to her homicide. And as a result of that, I suffered with what we now know today as post-traumatic stress disorder. So with the blessing of the Contra family in 2001, we established a charity in Tema's honor. And for the past 16 years, we have been involved in the development of curriculum for educational institutions. We provide peer and family support for the first responder community. And most of all, we've actually been involved in a number of research projects across the country, looking at mental health injuries as a whole, looking at best practices, and how can we as a community come forward and help our first responders and members of the military. So.
Great, thanks, Vince. Okay, Kevin, do you want to start us off and talk about
Sure.
a little bit of your experiences?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about how I essentially had to deal with my PTSD. I started back in 1988, and obviously my brother's was on Toronto Fire, and I started with North York Fire Department. We had a call back in 1992 where Andy Deloria, he died in a building, and it affected everybody. It affected the job. I think it affected firefighting in Ontario at the time. It became very political. And it affected me a lot more. I knew Andy personally. He worked out of my hall on a different shift. I really didn't know how to maneuver through what I was feeling. I just took it in stride, being part of the job. I really didn't worry about what I was doing, how I was feeling. And at that point, we really didn't have the mechanism in place to talk about what was going on. I carried on in our profession, and I was like everybody else. I was pretty active. I was active in the association. I played a lot of hockey growing up, and I continued playing hockey with Toronto Fire Services. I still enjoy the job today. I enjoy the training. I was on the heavy squad 143, and we had a murder, and we knew it was a murder going in. We showed up there, and we had to do what we have to do. And I was first one in on the patient/victim, and the things that happened to her were horrific, to say the least. What they did to her, of course, then it's one thing it's part of our job, so we think. And I just did what I had to do. I had to cut her down. I had to get her out of the bathroom, do all those things. And again, the way I processed it, I really didn't. I called it sat on the shelf. It sat on the shelf, and eventually the shelf falls when everything's piles up on it. And I just maneuvered through what I was doing. I had my own construction company, and I thought I was just living life on life's terms for a long, long time. Then I had to go to the court cases, and that's when I started really to relive exactly. And the biggest thing what I challenged myself what I could have done differently. What could I have done differently? If I would have did this, and this, she may be here today. And I really fought within my, I call it within my head. And my thoughts were really twisted for a long, long time. And of course, then I started self-medicating. I couldn't really live with what was always just falling back into place. It'd just be flashes here and there. I had to go back to court the following year for the next person who was involved in that crime. And it just brought everything back up to the forefront. And eventually I was realizing that I just wasn't coping with what I should be doing. My concentration wasn't there. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't, you know, call it whatever you want. I just couldn't live in life on life's terms. And eventually, my downward spiral, it took me to drugs and alcohol. And it took me pretty hard, you know. My brother was involved with our EAP program, and, you know, we would have chats. And I was so stuck in myself that, you know, you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your family. When I was trying to deal with my issues, those things didn't matter to me one bit. And, you know, it got to a point where, you know, we talk about the suicide, we talk about this, we talk about that. My spiral was taking me to places I thought I'd never do, things I thought I would never fall into. You know, I was spending money left, right, and center. But eventually I had to figure something else before I was dead. You know, for where I was in my disease, there's only 3 places you end up: jails, institutions, and death. And 2 of them I was there pretty often at the end of it all. And it was, I had to really change. And back in January of 2012, I would hit another rock bottom after another rock bottom. Eventually I made that call. And I went out down, spoke to the guys down in Renaissance. I gave my brother's information since he was looking after our EP program. They made the call to him, and I think he was a little bit surprised how deep and ugly my life was at that time. And it was ugly. It was, you know, it was just a matter of time before I ended up dead. That was just a reality. So, you know, that was the beginning of my journey. You know, I went to Homewood back in 2012. I came out of Homewood and I was no better. You know, I call it the spin wash and to dry out. You know, I went to a detox for 5 days to dry out. The spin wash was then, you know, they threw me in Homewood, and I just wasn't ready. The reality was I just fell right back into where I was, and I continued on to 2014. It's not that long ago, so I have to really remember that.
Okay, thanks, Kev. So you mentioned something interesting, that there wasn't a mechanism back there to report. So we'll pick up on that. Anybody else want to add to that? How PTSD affected either one of you? Bill or Vince?
Oh, go ahead.
For me, addiction. There's many addictions that can hit members. My addiction wasn't drugs or alcohol. My addiction is work. It still is kind of my addiction to this day. So I originally, when I was diagnosed, it took about 3 years for my initial diagnosis, and then I became a highly functional person on OSI, because I had a tremendous career. I did a ton of things. My own particular shooting, I don't even, I spent years just kind of suppressing it and forgetting about it. But the biggest thing that hit me was a spouse of a member that is going through the system, and to see the suffering that they have to go through, and the coroner's inquest and SIU, the Special Investigations Unit within the province of Ontario here, and the effect that still remains on our family, just for that, on our family, because of social media. Our children come home, you know, people that the other effect is on your children and your family, which a lot of people don't, they get left behind. And the social media, our children come home from school the last few years and they get challenged by classmates that have Googled our children's mother's name, right? And they start, saying, "Why your mom's a killer, and why does your mom, why does your mom have to kill somebody, and that kind of stuff." So in today's world, it never goes away, right? And so it's always there, and we're an anomaly in the whole system in Canada. Individually, my shooter was never identified or arrested, so I've gone several years, kind of not only with OSI, but being a victim of a serious crime. You know, when you think about how many times you put on a uniform and go to work, and somebody actually tries to kill you because you're wearing a uniform, right? And then, we call it lightning in a bottle in our household. Like, who thinks that their spouse that's doing the same job is going to be involved in something similar, right? So that led, as a result of that led me to be on the board of directors for the Police Association of Ontario, and not only be working all the time, but I was away doing all kinds of things, representing and trying to push things through, and I became involved in the conducted energy weapon or the taser project for the province, which was a big thing for me because taser didn't exist during my shooting, but for my wife's shooting, but it wasn't, everybody couldn't carry them because she wasn't a supervisor at the time, and and I was on the Ontario Police Memorial Foundation, and I sunk a bunch of effort into that because I was honoring. I almost ended up in the wall, and so that was a big thing. And I was also part of WCIB PTSD working group provincially for trying to make it better. And that legislation, now that it's come forward, doesn't help me at all. But it's with our organization we call Pay It Forward. No one in our organization gets paid. Everything that we do is, a lot of it's out of our own pocket, and we go forward trying to make sure that the road behind us is paved and people aren't hitting a boulder and going off the shoulder of the road, and they can stay and kind of follow a better path than what has happened to us.
Thanks, Bill. Vince, do you have anything you want to add before we go to Katya or Kathy?
Yeah, I guess speaking of what Kevin was speaking about, the sense of guilt that first responders feel sometimes when they attend to a patient and they can't just seem to make a difference. And I went through that sense of guilt with the Tamacontra call. And what I wasn't prepared for was the impact it had on not only my life, but also on the life of my family, my wife and my children at the time. And one of the things that really became very profound for me was the sense of wanting to keep them safe, and a sense of really being afraid to allow them to leave my sight of vision, right? So that constant paranoia of wanting to keep your family members safe. So it's a challenge. It really is a challenge trying to deal with mental health injuries as a whole. But it's not as bleak as we make it sound. There is help out there, and with the proper help, with the proper counseling, and the proper support, many of us go on to live very productive lives. So.
Okay, great. So on that note, the help. Is the help adequate? Is the help out there? Is it accessible? I'll start with Katya.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, but I think that even before we start talking about help is really understanding the major picture. As Kevin, Bill, and Vince all talked about, it's obviously the major impact of trauma and PTSD, but I think that we need to move now towards having a better understanding and comprehension of operational stress injuries. Obviously, PTSD is a major bulk of operational stress injuries. So operational stress injuries, or OSI, are defined as persistent psychological difficulty that arise from operational service-related duty. So of course, as part of OSI, we have PTSD, which the three of you really talked about, but then also very important other diagnoses. We're talking about substance use disorder, which most of you did talk about. We also have other anxiety disorders. It could be panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. Depression is also very predominant. Again, depression, after experiencing traumatic event, we can go through a depressive episode, which can then further increase our risk for developing post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, as part of OSI is, again, any condition that would impair our functioning. Once again, as part of OSI, we need to appreciate the various adjustment and stressor-related issues. So, for example, family-related issues that you all talked about. We also have employment concerns, financial stressors, pain and physical injuries. So, once we have a better understanding of this global picture of operational stress injuries, then of course we have a better, we are better able to assess its full range of impact. Do we have effective treatment? Absolutely. Do we need to make a further improvement in terms of our research and treatment and education? Absolutely. We know that we have a trauma-focused evidence-based cognitive behavior therapy, again combined with pharmacological treatment when indicated. And again, variety of other evidence-based, but so far right now, this is very much the bulk of it. The other thing here is is, all of you really talked about, it's again going back to the issue of stigma. So now that we have worked and we have noted this reduction in stigma in the past decade, we know that we have further improvement to be made, but that means that more people are going to seek help, and definitely we want early intervention, but that also means we need more services and we need more resources.
Great, Kathy. Kathy, anything to add to that?
Sure, just in terms of more services and more resources, I think it's very important that the different levels of care are diverse so that when people who are dealing with symptoms connected to their OSI or their PTSD, they can hopefully go for assessments and determine what level of care do I need. Would I benefit from outpatient services, doing things while I live at home and going into appointments and seeing a psychologist and peer support groups in the community while I continue to reside at home? Or has my day-to-day functioning and the way I walk in the world is so infringed upon by my symptomology, do I think I would benefit from residential care? And so I think all of those kinds of services require more attention and more resources so that there's more to choose from and that people have the opportunity to choose the ones that are suited based on where they are in their journey, right? Because people can be at very different stages.
And also, if I can follow up on a very important point that you mentioned, is really about peer support, right? That now is getting increasing recognition. And actually, peer support right now is considered as being an integral part of the comprehensive mental health strategy, and definitely as part of the operational stress injury intervention. Within Badge of Life in Canada, we have Brad McKay and Sid Gravel, whom very recently published a guide. It's called Walk the Talk, and it's a peer support guide for actually first responders and as well as for organizations. So that's very much, it's actually part of the treatment.
Right. So the Toronto Police Service, we have a very robust peer support program. We have probably about 150 of our members, uniform and civilian, that are specially trained or get a little bit of special training around trauma, PTSD, and they're available 24/7. So if we have an officer or a civilian for that matter that gets involved in any kind of a critical incident, we have on-call members that will normally meet the officers at the station, make sure they're okay initially, remind them of all the supports and services and EFAP that's available, and then normally 2 or 3 days later, our members are required to attend a mandatory debriefing session. And it's not debriefing about the incident, it's debriefing about, whether or not everybody's doing okay. Did you go home that night? Did anything trigger you? So those are mandatory sessions that our officers have to go to. They don't have to participate, but they have to go to. And those sessions are led by typically the peer support volunteer that attended and a clinician from our EFAP program. So I'll just add that. And then we'll go back to you, Kevin. So you had mentioned about mechanisms to report or the help. Can you maybe compare the stigma around mental health when you first joined the job?
Sure.
And compare it
and
now?
I think that's a very, very important aspect that we have to address. And one of the things that our International Association of Firefighters, they've got really, really involved. They actually had a program, Stamp Out Stigma. And what they did is they got people that were involved in PTSD, and they talked about their experiences. I was able to attend that presentation and present exactly some of the issues that I have today. But the biggest thing that we really have to do is we have to integrate with it's good to see you for fire service, your senior staff. We have to integrate with the programs. There's a lot of good programs out here. The government has given us the ability. We have the legislation that we have today. With these programs, we have to filter them through all levels of our organization. I call us the end users, the people that are out there suffering. We talk about how we get these calls. We have to identify the calls. We have to identify the guys, the needs that they're going to need right when it happens. And to be physically attached to that, not make the phone call, say, are you okay today? Because no matter what, we always retreat back to exactly what we know. We have to live within ourselves, and we think we're supposed to just live within that. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I could say we're doing a lot better. We have all the information now. We just have to be able to filter it through down to the end users.
Okay. Any strategies that anybody wants to share about how to?
Well, I'd like to
yeah.
comment on this talk around the stigma. It's not fixed. It's still very broken out there. First responders are still reluctant to come forward and ask for help. And it's just not within the first responder community. All we really have to do is look at the Canadian society as a whole and any issue around mental health issues. Canadians as a whole are reluctant to come forward. The Bell Let's Talk program has done tremendous work in raising the awareness of mental illness, but the politicians and our healthcare system hasn't kept pace. Yeah, we're all talking about it, but God forbid you need help with a mental health injury or a mental health illness. You walk into a local emergency department, you're lucky if you're seen within the 24 hours by a proper psychologist or psychiatrist. And if you do need a psychiatrist, you're on a wait list sometimes for up to 18 months at a time. The system is broken. And even within emergency services organizations, yes, we're all talking about it, but there's a disconnect between what the chief says sometimes and what the HR department actually does when somebody files a WSIB report. So I'm glad we're talking about it, but there's a lot of work still to be done around eliminating the stigma, and the only way we can do that is by having corporations really define in their policies and procedures how are they going to deal with their employees who are dealing with mental health injuries and illness. And we have to be cognizant that many organizations are still very reluctant to talk about this issue. And yeah, they'll have a peer support team on paper, but are they being funded accordingly by the organization? Are those peers actually getting the proper training? Or are they volunteering their time and not necessarily properly trained to provide that peer support? So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around that.
Anybody else want to touch on that?
Well, just for fire services, as an example, we just posted either yesterday or today, Sault Ste. Marie, Sioux Today news. Sioux firefighters are having a big battle with City Hall because their budget is millions of dollars over what they budgeted for, but the HR and city department didn't budget anything for the presumptive legislation for lung disease and for PTSD, even though they knew that all that was coming, right? So when you read the headline's actually, like, from my perspective as someone that has operational stress injury and all the things that go along with it, right away you're blaming those individuals that have put forward any claim because of stuff that happened during the course of their job, right? And it's not, it doesn't become the individual's problem. It's the organization or the corporation's needs to budget properly, right? And the incompetence isn't with the members that are putting in their forms. It's with the people that are running the show. And through Badger Life Canada, we're involved every day with people from Newfoundland, from the Arctic, from Victoria Island, and the system's broken it's not just Ontario, it's broken right across the country. And the biggest issue, just listening to the lived experience people, we do a lot of talking at our conferences and that about moral injury or moral wounding, and the medical stuff which is mind, body, and soul or spirit. And we do a great job now with having fitness programs for members and all that kind of stuff. We do a great job with people like Dr. Caddy and the people from CAMH, but we do a very poor job because we don't understand. And that's where, when you're sitting at home and you have an addiction and you have the shame and the guilt, that's what you're actually feeling, is the moral injury. And our members aren't dying from post-traumatic stress. Our members are dying from the moral injury part, and because they're in that abyss, there's no way out, and there's nobody addressing that. And through Badger Life Canada, we're committed to bringing some programs in. We have some great things going on right now, and if everything happens, we'll have a program that's going to address that specifically for first responders.
Okay. Caddy or Kathy, do you have anything to add before we go on?
I really like that you named the moral injury piece, because that is one of the primary symptoms we see in residential treatment that continues to affect people for quite a long period of time. When someone sees something or actually is a part of something that goes against their core value system, it can be very painful, especially if they didn't feel they had the power in the moment to affect change. And so they're left with those residual emotions, those residual visuals, and the guilt and the self-blame. And that is what eats away at the soul, and that is what can actually contribute to wanting to self-medicate through compulsive behavior or substance. And so those are debilitating features of the PTSD, is when you add those additional layers on top of.
And it's we also talked about we have a great relationship with Dr. Jonathan Douglas, who's the past president of Ontario Psychological Association, and he speaks a lot on sanctuary trauma, which goes in hand with moral injury. And sanctuary trauma is what is also basically how you're treated by your organization after you've been diagnosed with something, right? And I can tell you, I've been part of a bunch of programs like helping other members over the last year, and police members from across the country, part of large organizations. They've been off work for 2 years. No one from their organization has contacted them. Reached out, like not even friends, and to say, hey, not to say it's HR and I need this medical form. It's how you doing today, sort of thing, right? And I don't want to know about your medical stuff, and that is almost administration betrayal, right? Because they expect 100% from those members. There should be something coming back to those members as well. And the sanctuary trauma is that whether it's WSIB or your LTD carrier, and I've experienced it. And just before I retired with my LTD carrier, it was every week I had to have medical stuff to say the same thing that it said the week before, right? And it just exhausts you, right? And then your doctors are like, well, why the heck are you coming back? Like, nothing's changed. You're doing treatment and all that kind of stuff, and you still have to submit this form, right? And it's just the whole system is built to wear you down and cost containment, right? And because that's what it's all about. Nobody's got the money. If they allocate it properly, they have the money, but they don't wish to do that.
In terms of the moral injury, yes, very important feature of the operational stress injuries, because what we see is that, following trauma or any upsetting event, our belief system becomes shattered. And what we often find is that the moral injury could be either the onset of an illness, contribute to maintain an illness, but then also sometimes we might feel better in terms of symptoms and mood, but the moral injury, the shattered belief system, can be very much present and can therefore interfere with us being able to move forward our functioning, whether it's occupational functioning and social and personal functioning. And so within our treatment, evidence-based cognitive behavior therapy, and again also cognitive processing therapy, we very much look at the belief system that we have prior trauma, during a trauma, and then also following trauma. And this is where we are able to pinpoint the moral injury aspects, and definitely it's something that does need to be addressed.
Okay, great. So I guess for Kathy, recently the Ministry of Health put out a study to suggest that first responders are more than twice as likely to get or to become diagnosed with PTSD than a regular citizen. So are there any strategies or suggestions that you may suggest for organizations, first responders, of what we can do? Because we know right now in the province somewhere, there's a first responder seeing something or in a bad situation. So I'm just wondering, what can we do kind of ahead of the curve? One small thing we do at the Toronto Police Service for the last few years is that when we had recruits in, we don't have recruits anymore because we're not allowed to hire anybody. Different topic, but when we used to have recruits, we would have family days at the college before they were actually deployed. So we would have the officer and their family, kids, parents, grandparents, everybody was welcome. And we would have our psychologist present about all the things that the Toronto Police Service has in place to support not only the members, but the members' families. So that was, that's one small thing. Is that going to solve everything? No, but are there other strategies you think that organizations can do to?
I think that, obviously this is a very important question, and by me answering it in 2 minutes would not do justice. I think we all know this. We clearly, we need to look at the evidence-based, the best practice strategies right now. And they do discuss about very very much the importance, and Vince, you did pinpoint that, in terms of having organizational policies and procedures in place for the roles and responsibilities for all the stakeholders. So Chris also has very much mentioned, is everyone knowing, what are everyone's roles and responsibilities. So the more we have this within organizations, it helps to reduce inactivity and definitely helps to reduce confusion. As part of that also, what evidence-based practice has shown is the importance of disability leave plans. So whenever that is needed, what could be a disability leave plan for workers who do suffer from mental health conditions? So sometimes we have seen that some organizations do not have, others do have, so it's important to have a plan in place and work accommodations whenever needed. So as part of work accommodation, it's also important to have good and open communication among all the stakeholders involved, and to have optimized work accommodations. And when we do suffer from mental health problem, we actually do not have any standardized work accommodations, and simply because it's not very much possible to do so. It's a very individualized. Nevertheless, having an understanding of what are the symptoms and definitely what a person's functioning, person's functional capacities, limitations, restrictions, we are able to optimize the work accommodation for the person. And finally, it's about education and awareness for supervisors, for the leaders, for the family, and for all the co-workers, to further help reduce the stigma, but then also to further provide support, so that when we know that someone needs help, we are able to provide better support. But then the other thing is that if we need help ourselves, we feel more comfortable providing support. So there are some key outlined strategies. There's a lot of work, but I'm very much aware that Toronto Police is doing a great job in terms of definitely being aware of those issues and targeting them.
I just want to piggyback on, I think, what Bill said about the invalidating environment. So when somebody goes on a call and comes back and they get to experience a very informal, comforting conversation about having gone on a call, and being able to debrief is informal. It has to feel safe, because it's a group of alphas trying to say that was a tough call and this is what happened for me, and having that not be with alcohol, right? I think the more you can do around creating a culture where that's okay, I think that will help your members. And I also think having the opportunity to just be amongst each other after a call for long enough for your heart rate to go down. I know that sounds really simple, but if you can allow your members 10 minutes to relax, sit instead of stand, breathe deeply, lower their heart rate. If they can lower their heart rate, they can basically control their body temperature, and with that, their body can kind of let go of the traumatic experience a little sooner than if they just go to the next call and their heart rate gets jacked up again, and they go to the next call and their heart rate gets jacked up again, and then they don't spend time trying to de-escalate at the end of the day, and that builds up over time, and that destroys someone's autonomic nervous system, and that's PTSD. So I think just allowing for a little bit of time whenever possible to let the physiology of somebody's body settle after a call. I don't know if there's room for that. I don't know if it's realistic, but I think there is huge value in allowing for that time and space. But that's prevention.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. So I'm aware of the time, so I'm not sure, are there any questions that you want to ask any of the panel members before we go off and buy Easter eggs? Yes?
You talked about accommodation. What key outline strategies do you have for accommodation going back to work?
So there are a variety of procedures involved. So ideally, what we have found in terms of the evidence-based best practice is to have a return to work coordinator. So we have the return to work coordinator, but then also having open communication with the healthcare providers, the employer. So we have to identify for any individual what are the key stakeholders. So a lot of times is the healthcare system, the compensation system, the healthcare professionals, etc., etc. And then And for this, we are able to identify, not only, a lot of times is knowing the diagnosis is not necessarily essential. What's helpful to know is what are the person's functional capacities, and as well as the person's level of any limitations or any restrictions. So essentially not only the symptoms, but also the person's functioning to arrive with work accommodation. It's very much so. It's very much individualized, right? So for some people, it could be that yes, they might be able to go within that incident work site, but might not be able to engage in their pre-incident activities. For others, it could be that immediately they are not able to go to the incident work site, but they are okay within another work site, right? So that would again speak to what are the restrictions, limitations, and so we need to, again, it's a very much individualized work accommodation. But that's something that, again, all parties would need to be involved.
And I can speak for the, sorry.
How did the real life experience go for going back to work?
So for myself, it was a gradual work. Eventually I had to, first of all, I had to get within myself to know what I could do, my limitations, and at which time then I would have to work within the medical field, within a therapist and whatever else would have to accommodate. And Toronto Fire Service then were able to accommodate me as a gradual work back to work program. So, I was able to get back into work, and I'm back in full duties now.
So with the Toronto Police, we have our own medical advisory service. So if somebody does go off for any reason for an extended amount of time, once they're cleared by their doctor, we have our doctor clear them as well. So that's something that we do as well. We have a doctor that we have 3 days a week.
I gotta speak up on behalf of myself. One thing about myself, for me, I have to be open and honest with myself where I was. And for me to come out and talk about what my experiences, it helps others. So I was well received for the simple fact that for me, it helps me out and it does help others out. And I haven't heard any negative feedback. Everybody's supported me coming back to work, and it's been very, very encouraging.
Question at the back there?
I am seeing the climb up the hill to be almost at the top in my mind with agencies. I mean, Chris, you're the largest municipal police service in the country, same with Toronto Fire, right? I think we need to, how can maybe our experts from Bellwoods and CAMH, I'll address my question to you first, how do we celebrate those organizations that are up near the top and about to spill over and have a really, really mentally healthy workplace? I think there's, I think we're almost at the top of the hill. I believe, anyways. How do we celebrate that and get the others who maybe have to come along with us, kicking and screaming, perhaps?
I think if somebody comes into treatment and they have a positive journey and they actually heal and get better, and they themselves personally are comfortable sharing, for them to come back into a workplace and say, this is what I went through, I think that is celebratory, and I think it also makes it more okay and socially acceptable for someone else to say, wow, I had no idea he did it, maybe I can reach out for help as well, and it makes it safer. And again, if they have a good experience, it can be kind of acknowledged by an entire cultural space. So that's one idea.
Yeah, and I think that, initiatives such as, you talked about the Bell Let's Talk Day, and also we have CAMH's signature fundraising event, One Brave Night. So it's not only about raising funds, but it's really about discussing mental health and mental illness, and most importantly, providing support. And as part of CAMH's One Brave Night, and the same thing as we have noticed with Bell Let's Talk Day, is that people are more and more sharing their difficulties, their stories, but then also their success stories, what really helped them. And it has been tremendously helpful because people feel empowered, people feel that they're not alone, and very much realizing that, as we always say constantly, is seeking help is a sign of strength and resilience, and definitely a sign of courage. I mean, here we had, Bill and Vince and Kevin discussing, the very private struggles that you have gone through. I mean, kudos to you. That's marvelous. I mean, I think we all need to clap here for, sharing with us your story. But that's what it is, right? So we are able to learn, and other people feel more empowered, and in turn more likely to seek help.
I just want to say great presentation. I am with Toronto Fire Services. I'm with their peer support team. I've been doing it for about 15 years. And what I find now with our guys is it's a big city. Bad stuff happens all the time, nights, days on the highways. And I find our guys are seeing a lot of bad stuff. They miss a shift, they don't go in. And I get the call, we do the visit to the hall, we have a great peer support team. The problem that I see is kind of broken or we need to fix is when they do have an occupational stress injury, not post-traumatic stress, I want to get them back to work and happy again. It is so difficult now trying to find a specialist that deals with trauma and trying to get them in to see them within 3 days or a week without going through CAMH. And if it's WSIB, it's even longer, 3 weeks. So I don't want them to drink. I don't want them to get worse. And I'm supporting them on the phone, and it's getting worse. And I'd like to see somehow the groups or the people that work together, somehow that gets addressed so I can get them rapidly through the system, get them the care and the images and all that bad stuff from the call, try and help them park that the best I can so they can get back to work. Now I have a question, one last question. You mentioned a residential care program versus a psychologist. What's the difference between the two? Should they do both? Or is that more post-traumatic stress, the residential care, versus an OSI?
So an individual would need to be assessed, and usually what we look at is how acute their symptoms are. So are their symptoms affecting their day-to-day functioning in a very big way? And if it's in a very big way and they're living in their basement for 2 years and not coming up for air because the world's too scary, then we would recommend residential treatment. So it's come and stay here for 6 to 10 weeks and learn how to self-regulate and learn how to manage your symptoms, and when ready, do a bit of trauma processing and a bit of exposure work. However, if someone is able to maintain a certain level of functioning and they're functioning maybe somewhat within their family, somewhat at work, but they're struggling, then perhaps they would benefit from what we call outpatient care. So seeing a psychologist, perhaps attending a peer support group, a Wings of Change group, and doing 2 or 3 things a week as part of self-care could potentially be enough. But you do want them to have some form of assessment to help them determine what's the best kind of care for me right now, based on how acute my symptoms are.
But you're right in that in the meantime, the peer support is very much needed, right? It helps with the bridge. Oh, definitely. Yes, absolutely.
Guys have gone through the treatment, between appointments, I talk to them to see if they're okay, how they're doing, right? So it's really paramount.
Yes, and within the Ontario's comprehensive mental health and addiction strategy, the peer support has been found to be invaluable for the very reason that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I just like to see more rapid, this 3 weeks between appointments, it's too long.
I think we all share mutual goals.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we do understand.
Especially for our service and what we see and what we do.
Of course.
When they say that the numbers are so bad right now, that we have something, a side door to go through maybe, or, it'd be nice.
Absolutely.
Good. Any other final thoughts?
Just a couple points to make. One thing that I think is to your advantage here in the GTA is your huge services, you're the biggest. And so the anonymity is very easy to disappear and outside of the GTA when everybody knows everybody on the police department or the fire department or the EMS service. That anonymity doesn't exist. You're having struggles. We've had very good awareness programs. But because we're type A personalities, very difficult to do the next step of reach out and call for help. One thing that's happened in Waterloo region, and I heard this for the first time at a recent presentation they did there, because we recently had an EMS worker that committed suicide. Allowing somebody from fire to approach somebody from police that they trust to get into asking for assistance, or a police officer can come over and talk to somebody they trust from EMS, so that there's a interchange of who you're going to reach out to. Because within your own department, I think the biggest problem that I see with my coworkers is, yes, we're aware of the signs and symptoms, yes, we're sort of suspicious of who's suffering, but there's no way we're going to tell our peers or coworkers, because you're getting pulled off the truck, the whole shift knows. You approach management, you fear your job is in jeopardy. So internally, when you're a smaller service, everybody's going to know about it. Mm-hmm. So I like the idea that the invitation's gone out. If you don't trust within your own, the other two are there available to at least direct you to the assistance. Another point, and Vince will probably be more expertise at this than I am, but recently I became aware of York is sending out paramedics to check on the wellness of people that are off the job, which addresses what Bill was saying. You don't feel abandoned because now nobody's talking to you and you're disconnected from your coworkers and your employee and your fellow employees. So I think that's a big plus that needs to be shared.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. We do have a peer support phone line that is available to any first responder across the country. So for those smaller services, if somebody is afraid to reach out and ask for help, they can call our toll-free number and we will connect them with a peer. More importantly, we actually facilitate an introduction to a mental health professional within their community so that they can get the help that they need. And in addition to that, in partnership with Wounded Warriors Canada, we have a peer support and family assistance fund for first responders who have exhausted their extended healthcare benefits for psychological support. We will fund up to $1,000, assuming we have the funding available, because it's a very popular program. But over the past 18 months, we have funded over $150,000 in psychological counseling for first responders. So there are programs out there that responders can utilize outside of their services. And to speak to the York paramedic approach, we actually introduced in York Region a proactive methodology of providing peer support. Most services tend to be reactive and only approach somebody after a critical incident. We know that when it comes to peer support, it's more than just critical instances. It's family struggles, it's financial struggles, it's those individuals dealing with depression, whatever the case may be. So with York Region, we implemented the proactive approach where they actually have a vehicle assigned to a member of their peer support team whose only job is during their shift is to visit their colleagues in the ambulance halls and in the hospitals. And that is only done to actually connect, to take notice of their body language, any changes in personality, that sort of thing. And within the past year, when we look at their statistics, York has 600 paramedics. They've had over 10,000 interactions with their frontline staff in that 12-month period. And they were actually able to identify 6 of those colleagues who were suicidal or dealing with suicide ideation. And then they were able to get them the proper support. So this proactive approach has proven to be extremely beneficial. But again, not too many services are willing to provide the funding necessary to provide that sort of peer support. So we have to commend York for actually doing that.
One more, and then it's recognize the time.
I've heard a lot of good things, but I haven't heard anything on how we respond to our retirees. We have a bunch of people retired. They've been on the job. They've had the problems. They, on the surface, look like they're doing well. But once they leave the job and they've been, quote, a place to go to, and a place that the guys and everything accept you. Then you step out that door when you're retired, and you have that stigma. Where do you go and what do all these groups have for them, and how do you do it?
Our services are available to retirees.
You mentioned funding.
Yeah, so they'll,
I've been doing this 30 years, and I still haven't seen groups form into what we tried years ago on our job, the Department of Fire. And we tried years ago to get individual groups of guys that had gone through programs. And after they finished with them, we opened the doors to another way, was we're going to have a meeting if you're interested. And I can go back where we had 10 to 14 guys. 7 were police, 2 ambulance people, and the rest were fire. We used to meet on every other week, and we assisted each other. But then things like, if you don't pay attention to it all the time, because the workload can get very, very heavy after a while. And you don't have, quote unquote, a lot of helpers working for free. Because the first thing is, what are you going to pay them? Or how much time are you going to pay? So you're going to pay. So am I going to go and do that and still deal with the guy in an honest way? You come with your own angles. So what do we do? Having a group or an awareness where we can take this and to stimulate it.
That's a great question. Thanks for that. So what does the Toronto Police do? I'm going to be perfectly frank with you. I don't know. But I'm going to bring this back to our organization because I think that's a very important.
That is the main one.
So thanks for that.
Toronto Paramedic Services has a Pioneer Day every quarter. Any member who has retired from the service, or any member with 10 years of service or longer, is invited to attend that particular day. And all the retirees now have an opportunity to get together, share their stories, have lunch, and it's all paid for by the organization. So,
I haven't seen the funding, I haven't seen that care for, I can show you 10, 15 fellas I know, but they meet every week. And they're retirees, and they've gone through the program, they've gone through that. And they're in the back, you know where they are. I can pick out what time they'll be and what time they'll leave. When they get in the car, they're told. And that's the help they got, is that small circle of people that they can turn around and say, you know what, I did this. And they do open up, they do give you the information. So then you've got 4 or 5 guys groaning it. There's got to be a help here, man.
Thanks for that.
And it's all about funding. Every time I turn around, we took on the projects. How much money? To have our organization operate from the beginning, we started with 7 or 8. We went up to one time to 24 members. Then we had some discussions and the group changed, and it went down. It got so busy for some of these young lads and ladies on the job. Did they need to do that when they got home? When do I have a private time? When I'm having a struggle with me? I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not a drug addict, but I'm dealing with them. And you think where I'm going ahead with this, I'm always hanging out with drug and people with alcoholic problems.
Thanks for that. I'll bring that back.
So
Okay.
if I could just get a big round of applause for all of this.